Today, Dr. Bud Harris is going to be speaking to us about cracking open, his own memoir of struggling passages and transformations. Since he's telling his story in this book, I'm not going to further tell his story. He's a great storyteller, and also I'd like to have time for questions, because ordinarily people who come to Malaprops for events have excellent questions, and our authors usually enjoy addressing them. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bud Harris.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm always happy to be here at Malaprops, and I thank all of you for coming. And there's a special thing that I wanted to mention today about us and Malaprops. About a year and a half ago, we started our own small publishing company, Daphne Publications, and Malaprops has given us a lot of direction and support in doing that. And we've done that for a particular reason. As I've read books over the years, they've supported my life, they've helped me change my life, they've rescued me when I was in trouble. Particularly Jungian books have done that. And we've noticed in the last 10 years that Jungian books are getting more and more and more expensive. The last paperback book that I brought from Routledge, which was a wonderful book, but it was $35. And at $35 a pop, I can't read many books a week. So what we wanted to do is to at least bring our work out and make it affordable for people like us and people like you. And we have 3 or 4 books out now. We came out with In the Heart of the Feminine. We priced it at $16.99. We have come out with a new paperback edition of Sacred Selfishness. We priced it at $12.99. I have a book, it's Search for Self and the Search for God, coming out in the fall. That will be $14.99. And this book today is $9.99. And Malaprops has been very supportive of us in directing us and guiding us in this venture. And we're thankful to them, and we're thankful to all of you for supporting that. Now, this book that I'm talking about today, Cracking Open, a memoir of struggling passages and transformation, is about just that. My struggles, my passages, and my transformations during a particular period in my life. So I would like to begin by reading to you a few words from the introduction. These come from page 5 and 6. It has taken me a long time to fully realize that destruction is an opening to transformation, even though I knew it in my head. Themes of destruction and creation underlie our lives. If I follow the lines of thinking in my religion, creation is for the sake of redemption. But between these 2 poles are many moments of destruction. I was very surprised when a colleague, the Jungian analyst and author Charlotte Mathis, saw this in my life. In her gracious endorsement of my book, The Fire and the Rose, she said about me, he generously shares how his deepest early wound began a struggle to redefine perceptions of God and to make tough choices about money, vocation, family, and authentic relationship to self and community. Now, I've done a lot of inner work, but strange enough, even though I was well aware of how difficult my life had been, I had never thought of myself as seriously wounded. Yet I clearly was. I had never thought of myself as having had a breakdown, though Lord knows other people must have thought so. Perhaps I had read too many books growing up and became too romantic in how I looked at life. I know very well that I've had periods of loss and despair, even long ones. I have had at least 4 periods of what I refer to as periods of ashes. During these times, I compare my experiences with the legends of the phoenix and the real-world growth process of crabs called molting. In Greek mythology, the phoenix is a bird that transforms itself by setting fire to its own nest. letting itself be consumed by the flames until it emerges from the fire, reborn as a new creature. The crab grows while its shell does not. At a certain point, it must molt, shedding its shell, or be killed by its own growth. At that point, it secretes a fluid that loosens the shell until the crab can carefully squeeze its way out of the old shell. Then, without a shell for protection, it must hide itself away in the nooks and crannies on the ocean floor until a new shell grows. 3 times in my adult life, I have walked away from all that I had accomplished. I burned my own nest, or more likely squeezed out of the old shell that was choking my whole being to death. I didn't disdain the things that I walked away from. Even as I look back on my life today, I am still proud of my accomplishments. I honor them and the learning and struggle that I endured to attain them. My struggles as well as my accomplishments became part of the foundation of my future. I also suffered in the process because it is in my nature to be fully engaged in what I do. And when I do, and when I came to the place where transformation was necessary for my survival and growth, I didn't want to disengage. Sometimes I hid, hoping the need would go away, but it didn't. Life was calling at some level, and I knew that if I didn't answer, part of me, or maybe all of me, would perish. So in this book, I speak of my calls to transformations as periods of ashes. Sometimes we call them wilderness periods. In my book, The Fire and the Rose, I described in detail my midlife wilderness period that resulted in my going to Zurich to become a Jungian analyst. Today, as I approach my 8th decade, I realize that I have been working with people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s for over 20 years. Of course, I also work with younger people too. But my point is that I think there is another wilderness period, another great call to transformation as we approach the 4th quarter in our lives. Another call to go back through the underbrush of our experience and memories. The reality is that whether we like it or not, it was our experiences of pain, hurt, and anger that we so often had to repress out of our needs for self-preservation that shaped our personalities, our lives, and their courses. So once again, as we approach the 4th quarter in our lives, we are instinctively called to try to see ourselves as whole and create out of our experiences a new vision of who we are and the myth we are living by. And by myth, I mean the structure of values that can give us meaning, vitality, and a sense of purpose for the rest of our lives. I speak of this as discovering the self on page 13 in the book, where I say, discovering the self is our true center, that it has been working in our lives all along, connects us to the creative heart of life. Symbols of the self abound, frequently in the form of mandalas and divine figures in mythology. The presence of the self is often represented by gold, a symbol of our highest value. Our ability to give full expression to our true self leads us into a sense of wholeness and peace that comes from feeling at home in life, full as it is with challenges and disasters. This journey of discovery and fulfillment is one of becoming, a journey from one state of existence to another. It is a journey into being that results from coming home to ourselves and departing again and again. It's like the angels going up and down on Jacob's ladder. Now, this is a very important point. The first half of life is a journey into the form of our adult personality. The wilderness period we encounter in midlife is in reality an instinctual call. And by instinctual, I mean hardwired into our nature to begin our journey into wholeness. This journey is also the beginning of how we learn to understand that as we seek to know ourselves, we are strengthening the muscles that support our belief in life, not as an abstraction, but as we are living it. It is only from these inner struggles and the resulting strengthening of our belief in life that love in its most true sense can grow. As we enter the fourth quarter of life, we encounter another instinctual call, like the one we had in midlife, and often another wilderness experience that is urging us to take our inner journey deeper in order to free and live the best of ourselves in creativity and love. In truth, this book shows some of both of these experiences in my life. The midlife journey and the renewal of this journey as I approach the fourth quarter of my life in 1994. As I look back over time, I must tell you that deciding to share my life this personally wasn't easy for me. I write about my hesitancy on pages 16 and 17 and say, in the summer of 1994, I embarked on another period of transformation. This one wasn't a crisis or a period of ashes. It concluded with a dream that affirmed my decision to share the contents of my journals. I spent an evening rereading my midsummer journal entries and a story they had given birth to. I was debating with myself whether to share these reflections and their ensuing story with others. In other words, I was deciding whether I should make them public. These reflections were personal and represented experiences that both shaped and became expressions of my soul. I felt extremely shy about exposing them to the eyes and voices of others, especially those close to me who might misunderstand or criticize them. But as you can see, I've decided to share my work, and I made that decision before going to sleep that night. In fact, I recall wondering how my unconscious would respond to my decision. Shortly after midnight, I awoke from a deeply experienced dream that was filled with symbols of inner tranquility, wisdom, and wholeness. As I sat in the dark, I saw the lake in front of the house where I grew up. There was no wind, and the surface of the lake was still. The image was beautiful, and in a strange way, it seemed to span almost my entire life. At the center of the lake, where the water was deepest, and where beneath its surface springs fed its depth, was an ancient rowboat. Strong and heavy, the boat was made of dark wood that had weathered many storms. Standing in the boat, as if rooted in it, was an immense monk. His cowl was pushed back, exposing silver hair above serene blue eyes. His countenance expressed at once the experience of age, great vitality, and peace. He stood calmly fishing in the deep water. Physically, the monk resembled me, though my eyes are not blue, and his other facial features were not clear. but certainly he is a part of me, perhaps an image from my own depths, endorsing the closure of my writing project and the decision to share it. Thus ended my internal debate. However, because my work is so personal, it has taken me 20 years to carry out that decision. Now, the original writing of this book was a strange experience for me. I was writing in my journal, and today I have at least 3 journals. I have a personal journal for reflections and dreams. I have a writing journals for ideas that I'm writing about and thinking about. And then I have my darkness journal. But in 1994, I just had one journal that I wrote everything in. And one evening when I was writing some of my reflections on religion, my anima, my muse, my connection to my depths broke in, and I found myself writing the story that precipitated my midlife journey. And this story evolved into how I presented it in my admission interviews at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich in 1985. I would also like to mention that the Jungian analyst and author, James Hillman, is someone I have paid a lot of attention to over the years. Hillman suggests that we let our images and our imagination carry us deeper into ourselves and into our experience of life. And I agree with him. So I sat there, night after night, and just wrote what came to me in 1994. And because I couldn't resist it, I also added my commentaries that helped me understand myself and the healing and the wholeness that I was seeking. The story just came out. And it began like this on page 39. Do you notice what Dante says about fear in this passage from the Inferno? When I had journeyed half of our life's way, I found myself within a shadowed forest, for I had lost the path that does not stray. Many writers about midlife have used his words about losing the path at midlife. But I haven't read a single one of them that pursued the profound meaning of the fear that he spoke of in the next 2 lines. Just thinking about these years of bitter fear stirs a chain of memories that began with the events of an early spring morning in 1972. I had driven desperately since the wee hours of the morning until the sunrise dissolved the morning mist in the North Georgia mountains. Having left a cabin where I had gone in a forlorn attempt to piece myself back together, I was headed toward College Park, a small town outside of Atlanta. My desperate energy reflected the erupting emotions that had been dammed up for decades. My emotions had turned on me as forcefully as I had repressed them, clandestinely consuming my vitality until the dam began to crumble. Their power drove me through the night into another day, through the darkness in my soul, and closer, minute by minute, to the time and place of my beginnings and a story untold, a story I had violently denied. 18 years earlier, I had lunged across the border between late adolescence and adulthood with all the energy I could muster. The intensity of my surge had carried me for almost 20 years. But my intense effort to be someone I wasn't, someone who didn't have my past, had begun to backfire, and my world was turning to ashes. As I entered my mid-30s, I realized I had no strength left to hope again for hope. I wasn't burnt out, I was wrecked. I was speeding away from the husk of my former ideals and ambitions. A spiritually bankrupt business, a broken marriage, and children who were scared and confused. As I drove, I didn't dare think about these things. I didn't dare think at all. I had failed in every single area of my life that I felt was important. As a result, I was driven by a need which I didn't understand and couldn't question to return to the place where I grew up. As I drove, my thoughts traveled back through the years and through the darkness of an interior night. I clung to the steering wheel through the brutal fits and turns of mountain highways. Tears stung my eyes. I was headed home. Shortly after daybreak, I stopped at a small country restaurant. Thank God it was a real people restaurant where you could get eggs, bacon, grits, biscuits, and endless coffee. After that pause, I was back on the road. I passed a little church, a white clapboard sanctuary with peeling paint and a stubby steeple. It sat closed and empty on short pillars of bricks. In front of the church by the road was a trailer sign with yellow lights on top and plastic block letters proclaiming, "Where God leads, He will provide." Curiously, I felt better after seeing that sign, even though I hadn't been on good terms with God for a long time. I learned early in my life that He wasn't trustworthy, and I generally did my best not to believe in Him. But this sign struck some psychic sense organ. As I look back now, I know that at that moment, an inner reconstruction had been undertaken by a carpenter so deep within me that my then frantic consciousness remained unaware. So I was coming home. Let me talk about that for a minute. We have to come home to ourselves, as I said earlier, at least twice in our lives. Once at midlife, and again when we must enter our transformational period that is calling us into the fourth quarter. There may be other times as well caused by events in our lives, but these are the two big archetypal ones. During these periods, we must go deeper into our quest for healing and wholeness so that we can free our most profound potentials to be engaged in life. So while I was on my journey back to College Park in 1972, I met what was to become one of the most important images that would guide my future life. After an intense morning of experiences and reflecting on my mother's death and illnesses back in 1972, and this is on page 70, I sat in Shoney's restaurant with my thoughts. My coffee grew cold. Not ready to leave, I ordered a refill. Insights and memories were tumbling out of a long, overstuffed closet, and I dared not try to shut them in again. I felt odd. This area of my hometown had grown seedy, though, and I was not the only strange character hanging out there. Then Buddy joined me. He sat across from me with a puzzled look on his face, a little ghost from long ago. As I looked at Buddy in Shoney's, I asked him, was it worth it, all that love and pain? He can't answer me. He looks at me gravely through his 8-year-old eyes that haven't yet seen his mother sick. That was Buddy, my 8-year-old self's first appearance as an image in my life. This inner image has reappeared in dreams and in my active imagination. In one dream, he asked me, "What have you done with my life?" This image stays with me constantly and reminds me that I am in the fourth quarter of my life. And if you read this section on my father in the book, you will see why I keep using the football metaphor, the fourth quarter. When I look into the image of Buddy's eyes and hear the words, "What have you done with my life?" I remember that I am in the fourth quarter and that I want to be fully in the game. And by the end of the game, I want to have left everything I have on the playing field. When I was interviewing with Dr. John Mattern in Zurich in 1985 for my admission to the Jung Institute, another important figure in my early life came up. And let me begin reading about her, and I'm reading from page 53. And I'm picking up in my conversation with Dr. Mattern to build into that. As I mentioned dreams and sleep, John's attention turned toward me with a concentration that seemed close to prayer. You had another look in your eye, he observed, before I asked about your father's parents. Yes, I murmured, I was thinking of the lake and Eva. Eva was the Black Madonna, the goddess of the earth to me. There's a Black Madonna in the monastery at Einsiedeln at the other end of Lake Zurich. Have you seen it? Yes, I replied, but it's the wrong one. That one sits regally adorned, enshrined and protected in an elegant, spotless Swiss church. Besides, her features are white. She isn't heavy in countenance or body. She has no sense of soul in earth, earth made rich and black from the blood, sweat, and tears and bones, burnt from people as life cries out for God. Are you sure you hate God? John asked. Yes, for over 2 decades, I answered. But Eva, like my mother, had a mystical effect on me. I noted as I resumed my story. I continued to live in 2 realities, the reality of the story in my memory and the reality of the interview. One of my parents' greatest dreams was to live on a lake in the country. Shortly after the war, they pulled it off, purchasing a lake and 70 acres of woods just 5 miles from town. The beauty of the lake enchanted them, reminding them of Highland Lake, where they were married, in the mountains of North Carolina. Eva and her husband Horace, plus his 13 children by his deceased first wife, came with the lake. She was the cook and caretaker of the house, and Horace was the caretaker of the land, some of which he farmed. Until yesterday, I hadn't thought of Eva for years. Her black-skinned flesh was soaked with the qualities and wisdom of the earth. There was no doubt that she was sensitive, proud, and stubborn. At the same time, she overflowed with a great spontaneous capacity for laughter, especially at the blunders of city people trying to live a country life. She carried the kind of weight that made her solid and powerful, rooting her to the earth and instilling her with a primeval energy and dignity basic to life. We all, with the exception of Mother Harris, my father's mother, who was spontaneously jealous of her, fell in love with Eva the first day we met her. But as a white city boy in the country, I felt there was an air of mystery and deep strangeness, something impenetrable in the life of rural black people. In my middle-aged mind, as I look back in time, Eva's house was a temple to the earth. It was made of dark wood and stood on short columns of bricks, as many country houses in Georgia seem to do. There was no electricity or running water. The inside of the house was dark and rich and always seemed to be filled with new smells and faces. Tantalizing odors of wood smoke, newspapers, kerosene lamps, and cooking blended. They came together, forming a special earthy incense. I love the memory of those smells in her temple. They remind me of how sanitized I've become, and even though I prefer that, a part of me also longs for the mystical, personal nature of an earthier way of life. When it came to food, I can say only that Eva could cook anything. Side by side with my mother, she raised and canned hordes of vegetables and fruits, and she baked cookies and cakes beyond the imagination. From frog legs to scuppernong wine, from turtle soup to blackberry jam, she seemed beyond challenge as long as she captained the kitchen. Smart aleck city boy that I was, I first considered her a little ignorant and superstitious. She let me extend myself until this point of view was reversed on me. And I still remember the first time this happened. It was shortly after we had moved to the country. My parents had bought me a David Bradley garden tractor from Sears so that I could help with the gardening and upkeep of the property. This was a very impressive piece of equipment for a 10-year-old boy. Proud of my mechanical beast, I arrogantly offered to plow up Eva's sizable vegetable garden for her. Formerly, her garden had been turned by enlisting her 13 children, or Horace, if he wasn't busy elsewhere, had plowed it with the mule. I proudly took to the field with my mechanical beast. Eva assumed her typical boulder-like stance, arms folded, face quiet and serious. At this time, she was surrounded by all 13 children who had turned out for this big event. Manfully, I plowed and struggled. My machine with the automobile-sized tires bumped and jerked over the freshly turned earth. The rows I turned were becoming increasingly erratic, but I stuck to my goal of turning over the whole field. Without moving, Eva gravely observed me the entire time. Finally finished and exhausted, I beamed. "How's that?" She replied, "Thank you, it's fine. But if you had plowed in the other direction, you would have turned the dirt outside onto where you had already been, and it would have been a lot easier." This, I discovered, is how you learn from country people. They watch you make a complete fool of yourself, and then everybody has a good laugh and forgets it. Once you learn to be humble enough to ask for advice, they generously lend a hand. Eva's practical and earthly wisdom represents a buried way of learning through experience and humor that is slipped behind our frenetic horizon. So at this point, I would like to kind of come to a close here by reading a couple of paragraphs from my epilogue, and then I will be glad to take some questions. My journal entries document key moments and phases in my individuation. Part 1 of this book records my ongoing spiritual and religious quest, my attempt to find meaning in spiritual experiences, God and Christianity. When I read over these journal entries today, I am uncomfortable with them. Something about them seems not quite right. Perhaps I feel they're a little bit too detached, a bit too oriented from an observer's perspective. Maybe I was too one-sided in my approach to religion, too thinking, too conceptual. Maybe I was not honoring our religious urge as one of our great archetypal instincts. I'm not sure. But over the years, I've found these ideas have been valuable to me. I see the seeds of my book, Sacred Selfishness, in them. They were nurtured by the monk from my dream, whom I led into my life as a companion, teacher, and mentor through active imagination. I can trace other lectures to these reflections and even sense new ones evolving. In time, journaling as an ongoing practice helped me realize that to be alive, our religion, our spirituality, and even Jungian psychology must be lived. Living gives us the opportunity to create and find meaning, and our spiritual quest is to become whole, fully alive, and fully human. God lives in our flesh and blood experiences. In part 2 of this book, The Cracking Open Story, I move from thinking about religion in a formal way, which has its own importance, to considering my actual life experiences. I believe this story honors religio, which means linking back, in its essence. This linking back is the working basis for living into a future that is a true expression of our life. In this vein, we discovered that there is often a heavy price to pay for a fulfilling life. Part of that price is to confess our own weaknesses and confront our shadow. Finding the courage and tenacity within us to pay this price gives us access to the hidden source of power within us, the self. In the beginning and in the end, cracking open is a window into my life's journey, past, present, and future. It is about burning away patterns of living that have been imposed on me by circumstances and other people. It documents my sometimes raw and painful journey through the individuation process, revealing, I hope, how we can become aware of the self with a capital S by reflecting on the life we have lived and the one we are engaged in. The word engaged here is a key word because if we are not engaged, we do not have much to reflect on. Only then can we come to love the self's blueprint for us, God's intention for our lives, more than we care for the goals of our ego. It is in actualizing the self's pattern for our lives that our lives become a true expression of who we are, rather than dominated by the needs and insecurities of our personal wounds and histories or their expectations of other people. Again, as I have said, I hope my choice to share this personal part of my journey has been and will be helpful to you. As helpful to you as it has been for me. Living this way brings many challenges, and yet I have found it to be our greatest source of inner peace and joy. So thank you. That finishes my presentation, and I'm open for some questions.
I was wondering if you could speak about the archetype of the cynics and the role of elders and wisdom keepers in contemporary society.
I can speak a lot about that. The cynics, of course, is the archetype of the old man. We hear mostly of the negative cynics, who is the critical old man in our culture that makes us feel so badly about ourselves, the negative animus in women, and the opposite of the puer aeternus, the ongoing youth in men. It's very interesting to me to try to talk about the old man at this point because we're at a new era in history at my point, in my estimation. I spoke about we have the midlife journey and then we have the journey going into the fourth quarter. Because we're living longer and we have pathfinders now who are living well into their 90s and some over 100 being very actively engaged in life, we need a new vision and a new myth for age. And I think the cynics as an archetype can exist in our psyche, but we're going to have to redefine him as part of redefining that vision and give him a new place in later life, I would say after age 90. So, any other images catch any of you too, or any other comments on images? The two images I mentioned that meant the most to me were the monk, who became like a spiritual director to me in my active imagination, and the image of myself as a child who keeps popping up and asking me this question, what have you done with my life? Which has also been a sort of a spiritual director. And so to go back to what you said, that's almost having the child on one side and the cynics on the other side, both going in the same direction. Yes?
Do you talk in this book about, you talked about the wounding, about your wounding in this book?
You bet.
Okay.
I was too shy to read about a lot of that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to know if you went into that.
I go into it in considerable detail. Yes?
Two questions about your writing. Do you write every day? Do you write in your journals? Do you you write in, you mentioned 3 journals. I'm just interested in your process. Do you write in all 3 every day? Or can you just talk a little bit about just the process and how you...
I am not a disciplined person in that regard. I write as my anima or the spirit engages me, which is fairly frequently. And it's probably almost every day, but it's not a disciplined time every day. And frequently she wakes me up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'll write for half an hour or an hour. But I do it in relationship to my inside. But because I engage in my profession very strongly, I have to wait until kind of my they personality is out of the way. Does that make sense? Okay.
In a society that's so diverse like the one we have, do you see the potential for a collective transformation? And the other part of my question is, what are the prerequisites for an individual to gain the insight that you have and say, this is a journey that requires a transformation?
In terms of the diversity of culture, I think culture in the Western world has evolved past the point, and I believe Jung thought this as well, where we can have large movements or changes that are not rooted in individual changes and growth that spread until we have a total change. That, in other words, they can't be imposed from the outside. The biggest thing that I think that can help us get on this journey is to quit thinking of our problems as something that need to be fixed so that we can get on with our lives and start asking ourselves how we can confront them, ask them what is the meaning in what we're experiencing and how are they trying to teach us that we're living out of harmony with ourselves. And the only thing that can result from those kind of questions, I think, is an inner search. Does that make sense? Good. Yes.
Do you still have a practice?
Yes.
Where?
Pardon?
Where?
Right here in Asheville.
Right here in Asheville?
Yes, my wife and I both practice full-time here. That's why I end up writing at 2 o'clock in the morning. Yes.
You said that it took about 20 years for you to develop the courage or the desire to share your experience. And I wonder if now that you've done it, you could share what it's been like.
It's been surprisingly good. The reaction that people have given to me from reading the book has been very affirming. And most of the time, you know, I also get comments, wow, you're a person just like me. Well, yeah, that's really true. But the response has been good. And it was my own shyness that kept me from sharing it for this long. Because a lot of it is personal, is very feeling oriented. Yeah. Yes.
When you're doing your journaling, do you include your dreams? Dream journal also? Or?
In my personal journal, I include my dreams, in my reflections on my day and on my emotions. Yes.
Do you find any difference in your own reaction, like when you reread them and you're trying to sort out what was going on? Do you find a different kind of response, say, to your or 2 o'clock awakening thing as opposed to, or a contrast to, say, waking up with a dream, extended dream or short dream?
I don't quite follow you. Do I find a
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know. Would you say that those are 2 different types of experiences? I mean, reflecting more or less consciously, I understand, you know, when you wake up and something that maybe from the day or the week or...
When I wake up with a dream and write it down,
Yeah.
I usually don't think about it, I just write it down.
Just write it down.
Think about it the next day.
Yes.
Generally, the next morning, I'll write it down. I don't think about it until after I've written it all down.
Right, sure, oh, yeah.
Frequently, when I'm writing at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's about one of the projects that
Yes. right,
I'm
that's
writing
it.
on.
Yeah, so the different type of
Yes,
process if you want.
yes,
That's going.
uh-huh. Yes.
Could you say what the theme of your book was? I mean, like one basic theme?
In this book,
Yeah.
it's myself cracking open. It's myself cracking the shell like the crab did. It's myself burning his own nest like the phoenix did.
So did you begin to crack it in your years of 40 or so, but then you crack all the way, and so now it's the bigger crack, or what?
Well, you know, like the crab, it doesn't happen just once. It happens over and over again. And this was the big cracking that led me into midlife. It led me into midlife. It was not my total midlife experience. Yes.
Other than the child asking the question, what have you done with my life, have there been any other consistent, persistent themes throughout these years that you continue to work with?
There are two. One is the quest for consciousness, as Jung defines it, and individuation. And the other is the pursuit of what I consider to be my myth or my destiny, which is to be a Jungian analyst, number one, and a writer, number two. So those themes have been going on since midlife. So I'm a mission-oriented person, or a purpose-oriented person, or a meaning-oriented person, or however you want to throw all those together.
Then did the emergence of those missions come from the crisis, the earlier crises and struggles? I mean, explicitly.
They evolved out of those through the inner work that I did in Zurich and afterwards. Yes,
How long were you in Zurich?
5.5 years.
And analysis the entire time?
Yes, normally twice a week. And also in a culture, you know, that was paying attention to the inner life. Good. Thank you so much.